internal market is the essential basis on which businesses are able to trade freely across the United Kingdom, minimising red tape and maximising opportunities. In Scotland, 60% of outgoing trade is with the rest of the United Kingdom, more than the rest of the world combined.
The internal market is beneficial for all parts of the United Kingdom. It is, however, more important to those areas where there is a border. Therefore, would the Minister agree that the internal market should be very helpful in maintaining and developing economic activity in the Borderlands area, but would he also agree to consider a second Borderlands growth deal, which would certainly help the area on both sides of the border?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The UK's internal market is essential to promoting economic activity, ensuring that businesses in the borders, in my own constituency, Carlisle and beyond, benefit from frictionless trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. The Borderlands growth deal, with a £265 million investment from the UK Government, was signed in July 2021 and is developing a range of projects to further boost economic growth.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr Speaker, when the BBC has headlines on web pages titled, "Why does Ireland have so much cash?" isn't the reality that independent Ireland is successful in the European and world markets compared to Scotland trapped in the UK? Ireland with a surplus of £8.6 billion to spend in their society, the UK has deficit and cuts hurting people. So can the Minister remind us, what is the size of the UK deficit?
Mr Speaker, I'm very clear that Scotland is better served by being at the heart of a strong United Kingdom. And the spending figures of the Scottish Government are very clear in terms of the dependency of it being part of the UK to support vital public services like the NHS, schools and the transport network.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Right, let us move to Barry Sherman.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, water quality policy is a devolved policy matter in Scotland. The Scottish Government is responsible for biodiversity in rivers and streams in Scotland, not the United Kingdom Government. It would be for the Scottish Government to take action on this vital area.
Is it not the truth that Scottish waters and streams and rivers are purer and cleaner because the Scottish people rejected privatisation of water and, led by Scottish Labour, made sure that we had Scottish water in the public realm and delivered clean water for everyone?
Mr Speaker, well, the honourable member is absolutely wrong. According to a recent report, untreated sewage has been released into Scottish waters and seas more than 58,000 times over the last 5 years. But only 4% of sewage overflows in Scotland are actually required to be monitored, unlike in England and Wales, where nearly 100% are monitored thanks to the efforts of this government. Unlike this government, the Scottish Government and Scottish Water are failing to take the tough action to monitor sewage overflows and protect our very important waterways.
Mayo.
Number 11, sir.
Mr Speaker, this government is committed to protecting free speech. It is the responsibility of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament, working with Police Scotland, to ensure that the hate crime legislation is implemented and enforced in a way that protects freedom of speech and has the confidence of people in Scotland.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr Speaker, the Scottish Government's Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act came into force this month. It's already having a chilling impact on free speech. So what lessons can the UK Government learn from the introduction of this poor legislation in Scotland?
Well, yes, and Police Scotland already have stretched resources, not least because they've been checking up on the SNP finances for the last 3 years. But Mr Speaker, he's absolutely right. We do have concerns that the legislation could have a potential chilling effect on free speech, but it's for the Scottish Government to speak to its own devolved laws. And for my part, I believe it's an awful piece of legislation. It lacks clarity as to what constitutes an offence. And importantly, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has made it very clear that the UK Government will not enact similar legislation.
Chair of the Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
Never before has such rubbish been uttered about a piece of legislation as been uttered about the Hate Crime Act. In 1 week, the Tories have tried to repeal this, and given that this mainly consolidates existing legislation, this will leave us unprotected against Islamophobia, racism and homophobia. Will he now issue one of his famous colonial decrees and tell the Scottish Tories to back off?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, those laws already existed. That's the important thing. Secondly, I was right about police resources. The 8,000 hate crime reports in the first week. That is more than was in any of the 7 preceding years. This is a ridiculous, unnecessary piece of legislation.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. I now call Kirsten Oswald.
Question 1, please.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the thoughts of the whole House are with the people of Hainault in East London. Following yesterday's appalling attack, such violence has no place on our streets. It's absolutely heartbreaking that a teenage boy has died, and I can't imagine what his family are going through. And we send them our heartfelt condolences and offer our very best wishes to all those injured. And I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to the police and other emergency first responders for embodying the highest standards of public service under such awful circumstances. And I know that our thoughts are also with those injured this morning in an attack at a school in Sheffield. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We already know that more than 1 in 5 teenagers are vaping, with some experts describing this as an epidemic. And yesterday, new research suggested that teenagers who vape could be at risk of exposure to toxic metals, potentially harming brain or organ development. I agree with the Prime Minister in his wish to reduce the harms caused by smoking and vaping with the Tobacco and Vapes Bill. Will he agree with me that permitting football strips to be sponsored by vaping companies sends entirely the wrong message to young people, and that it's now time to ban vape companies advertising on sports strips?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank the honourable lady for her question? Obviously, your decisions about kit sponsorship will rest with individual teams, but I do agree with her that it is important we do everything we can to tackle the scourge of teenage vaping, which is why I'm glad that she supports our bill, which will clamp down on the marketing, availability of flavours, targeting point-of-sale purchases, but also improving funding for trading standards to clamp down on those selling vapes illegally to children.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. My husband is a veteran, and the defence of the country is the government's first duty to protect people across the United Kingdom. So can the Prime Minister reassure the House that he has a plan in place to back our world-leading armed services? And does he know why the party opposite refused to back his plan?
Well, can I start by paying tribute to my honourable friend's husband and all our veterans for their service to our country. And she's right, in the most uncertain times since the Cold War, that it's right that we build our security, protecting our values, our interests, and indeed our nation. That's why this government has taken the step to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, making us the biggest spender in Europe under NATO. And when the Labour leader stands up, I hope that he stops dithering, does the right thing, and confirms that he will back our plan to increase defence spending.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I join with the Prime Minister in his words about yesterday's awful events at Hainault. I'm sure the whole House will want to commend the first responders and send our deepest condolences to the family of the 14-year-old boy who was murdered. And I join with the Prime Minister's remarks about the attack in the school in Sheffield as well. I know everyone in this House will be delighted to see His Majesty the King returning to his public duties and looking so well, and we all wish him and the Princess of Wales the best in their continued recovery. I'd also like to welcome the member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich to his place on these benches. After nearly 2 decades as a Tory politician and an NHS doctor, Mr. Speaker, he's concluded that if you care about the future of our country and our NHS, then it's time for change. It's time for this changed Labour Party. And as of today, he's our newest Labour MP. But I'm sure he won't mind me saying that I hope he loses that title on Friday. Mr. Speaker, when a lifelong Tory and doctor says that the only cure for the NHS is a Labour government, isn't it the time the Prime Minister admits he has utterly failed?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to actually see the honourable gentleman from Central Suffolk in the House today. That's because he recently pointed out that residents of his local Labour council are, and I quote in his words, charged much more in council tax, but in return receive lower quality services. Now, he's been wrong about some things recently, but on that point, he's absolutely right. And this week, people everywhere should vote Conservative.
He comes out with all that nonsense, but he locks himself away in Downing Street bunker, moaning that people aren't grateful enough to him. The reality is Tory MPs are following Tory voters in concluding that only the Labour Party can deliver the change that the country needs. And I say to those Tory voters, if they believe in a better Britain, then they're safe with this changed Labour Party, and it's for them. Mr. Speaker, in the 2 weeks since we last met at this dispatch box, has the Prime Minister managed to find the money for his completely unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance?
Mr. Speaker, of course, we addressed that a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to address it again. But I know that economics is not his strong point, but he might do well. He might do well, actually, to listen to a shadow education secretary who just this morning said, no, that's not how it works, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, the IFS have also said the link between national insurance and public services funding is illusory, just like Labour's economic plans, Mr. Speaker. But it's crystal clear. There's one party that's going to deliver tax cuts for working Britain, and it's the Conservative Party.
That was a long ramble.
Order. Whoever's banging the furniture will have to pay for your damages. Can we have less of it? We are not at the sixth form now. Come on,
Well, that was a long rambling non-answer to the question, which was, has he found the money to fund his £46 billion promise to abolish national insurance? And whenever he's asked about the date of the election or people's pensions, he acts as if answering straightforward questions is somehow beneath him. But pensioners and those who are planning their retirement deserve better than his contempt for their questions. Because if £46 billion were cut from its funding, the value of the state pension would almost halve. So I don't apologise for asking him again.
Order. Mr. Gullis, you've got the next question you're not going to reach. You've got a 10-minute rule, Bill. I'd be quiet for a while if I were you. Sorry, Leader of the Opposition.
So I don't apologise for asking on their behalf again whether he will finally rule out cutting their state pension to fulfil the enormous black hole in his spending plans.
Mr. Speaker, of course we can rule that out, and the honourable gentleman should stop scaremongering, because it's thanks to the triple lock that we've increased pensions by £3,700 since 2010, and they will rise in each and every year of the next Parliament. But it's Labour that always hits pensioners hard. It's his mentors, Blair and Brown, that broke their promises, raised pension taxes by £118 billion and delivered an insulting 75p rise in the state pension. As
as one former Labour advisor just said, Brown destroyed our pension system. They did it before, they'll do it again. Labour always betray our pensioners.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear he can't answer the question where he's going to find this £46 billion. No, he said, luckily for him, no, that's where he said it's not coming from. It's not said where it's coming from. Luckily for him, one of his peers, Lord Frost, yes, him again, does. He says to solve the Tory spending plans, the state pension age should be raised to 75. Now, understandably, that will cause some alarm. So will the Prime Minister rule out forcing people to delay their retirement by years and years in order to fulfil his £46 billion black hole?
Mr. Speaker, I've answered this multiple times to the Honourable General. I'm happy to say again, this is the party that has delivered and protected the triple lock. But I know, Mr. Speaker, ultimately he's not worried about any of this because we all remember that he's got his very own personal pension plan. I think we all remember it, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, it comes with its very own special law. It was called the Pension Increase Scheme for Keir Starmer QC. It's literally one law for him and another one for everyone else.
He wants to abolish national insurance. It'll cost £46 billion, and he won't tell us where the money is coming from. We're no closer to an answer. I'm going to persevere because last year the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners. His Paymaster General went a step further. He said these are the sorts of things that we need to look at. So will he now rule out taking pensioners' winter fuel payments off them to help fund his £46 billion black hole?
Mr. Speaker, it was this government that just this winter provided double the winter fuel payment to support pensioners. But what is crystal clear, Mr. Speaker, is that we believe that the double taxation on work is unfair, Mr. Speaker. We believe that hard work should be rewarded, and that's why this week we're cutting taxes by £900 for everyone in work. But in contrast, Mr. Speaker, it's Labour's newest tax advisor who thinks pensioners should be taxed more. That's his words, Mr. Speaker. This advisor calls them codgers. He thinks that supporting them is a disgrace, and he believes that their free TV licences are ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. It's Labour who hit pensioners with tax after tax, and they would do it all over again.
Mr. Speaker, is it any wonder that his MPs are following Tory voters in queuing up to dump his party? And even the mayors that he's apparently pinning his political survival on don't want to be seen anywhere near him, because until he starts setting out how he's paying for his fantasy economics, he's got a completely unfunded £46 billion promise that puts people's retirement at risk. How does it feel to be one day out from elections with the message, vote Tory, risk your pension?
Well, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow voters will have a choice, and it will be a choice between mayors like Andy Street and Ben Houchin who are delivering, or mayors like Sadiq Khan who just simply virtue signal, Mr. Speaker. It's higher taxes, more crime and ULEZ with Labour, or it's lower taxes and better services with the Conservatives. That's the choice. From West Midlands to Teesside to London, there is only one choice. Vote Conservative.
Mr. Speaker, we can see the Rwanda deterrent is working, and we've now deported our first illegal migrants. But unsurprisingly, Labour just don't care. The Shadow Home Secretary is busy posing for pics, encouraging more boats to come over. The leader of the Labour Party said he would cancel the Rwanda flights. He took a knee when signing letters stopping us deporting illegal foreign national offenders who committed crimes like murder and rape. And he'd do a deal with the EU, surrendering our borders to 100,000 legal migrants. Isn't it right, Prime Minister, that only the Conservatives will stop the boats and cut legal migration?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working. Legal migration, the latest figures show, down by 24%. Student dependence down by 80%. But we all know Labour's big idea. It's to scrap the Rwanda plan, even when it's operational, Mr. Speaker. But as one senior Labour advisor said to Andrew Marr just yesterday, we can't just come in, tear it up and have nothing to put in its place. I'm sorry to break it to them, but that's exactly their policy. While we're getting on stopping the boats, all Labour would do is stop the planes.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Armed Forces Minister was neither able to confirm nor deny that UK troops may soon be deployed on the ground in the Middle East. Now, the public watching will be hoping that members of this House do not have a short memory when it comes to the potential deployment and involvement of our military in the Middle East. So can I ask the Prime Minister to provide some much-needed clarity? Is he giving active consideration to the deployment of UK forces in the Middle East, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, you wouldn't expect me to get into any operational planning details, but what I will say is we are absolutely committed to supporting international efforts to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is something I think the whole House would support by land, sea and air. We've obviously tripled our aid commitment, and right now, together with the US, Cyprus and other partners, we're setting up a new temporary pier off the coast of Gaza to get aid in as securely and quickly as possible.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, let's all be in no doubt. Aid is required in Gaza, and it is required because when people are not being bombed, they are starving to death. The solution to that is a ceasefire and the opening of safe ground air routes, not the involvement on the ground of UK military personnel. These are dramatic and potentially dangerous developments. So will the Prime Minister confirm to the House today that before he makes a decision, all members will be afforded a vote?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to apologise for our armed forces playing a leading role in supporting international efforts to get more aid in. And indeed, we are sending Royal Navy support ship, RFA Cardigan Bay, to the region to support that effort. But when he talks about this conflict, the fastest way to end this conflict is to ensure that we have a hostage deal that gets hostages out, aid in, and for there to be a sustainable pause in the fighting. And it seems clear that there now is a workable offer on the table, so I hope he joins with me in encouraging all parties, including Hamas, to accept that deal so we can move towards a sustainable solution.
Sir Bill Wigan.
My right honourable friend's decision to cancel HS2 led to £207 million for Herefordshire's potholes and transport infrastructure. Hereford Hospital has a new wards, more beds and a new diagnostic centre on the way. £35 million has been allocated to the River Wye recovery plan. Inflation is down, the Rwanda bill has been passed, and defence spending is increasing. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if he carries on like this, he's going to win the next election?
Mr. Speaker, I'm thankful for my honourable friend in highlighting the work that the government's doing, whether that is increasing our defence spending to keep us safe, securing our borders with our Rwanda Act, cutting taxes by £900, raising the state pension by £900. And I'm also pleased that locally in Herefordshire we are filling in potholes, helping to save the River Wye and improving local health services. It shows crystal clear that it's the Conservative government that has a plan and is delivering a brighter future for our country.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In February, his Foreign Secretary said it would be difficult for a ground offensive on Rafah to avoid harming civilians and destroying homes. Just yesterday, his Deputy Foreign Secretary admitted he was struggling to see how such an attack could be compliant with international humanitarian law. All the signs are that Netanyahu is about to defy the international community. An attack on the 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah is imminent. If that attack begins, will that be the moment when the Prime Minister finally finds the moral backbone to ban arms exports to Israel? And if not, how much more suffering has to happen before he acts to prevent further UK complicity in crimes against humanity?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what the Honourable Lady did not acknowledge at all is that Israel suffered an appalling terrorist attack that kills hundreds of its citizens, and it does have the right to defend itself. Now, of course, as I've been crystal clear, we want to see humanitarian law respected and adhered to by all parties. Too many civilians have been killed, and we do want to see Israel take greater care to avoid harming civilians. I've made these points repeatedly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, specifically about the impact of any military incursion into Rafah, and we continue to say to the Israelis at all levels that we want to see more aid going in and bring about a hostage deal so we can move towards a sustainable ceasefire.
Andrew Slew.
The 60% increase in funding for special educational needs and disabilities is extremely welcome, but the challenges around the recruitment of community paediatricians mean that some children in Leighton Buzzard, Dunstable and Houghton Regis are waiting too long for an assessment. What can the NHS do to attract more of the 39,000 additional doctors recruited under this government into community paediatrics as a specialty, which is incredibly rewarding and important?
Oh, my honourable friend is right, and I know he joins me in welcoming the significant action that we've taken already to improve children's health, whether that's reducing sugar in children's foods, but the £600 million we've also invested to improve the quality of sport and physical activity in schools. The NHS has established a special group to ensure that the recovery of paediatric services keeps pace with that of adult elective care too, and I know that he will be pleased that the NHS long-term workforce plan that we have fully backed doubles the number of medical school places in England, increases specialty training places, and that will increase the size of the pool from which community paediatricians can be drawn in the future.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you. I know that you, Mr. Speaker, want to join me in sending condolences to the friends, family and colleagues of our former colleague Lord Andrew Stunnell, who served with exceptional diligence and grace as MP for Hazel Grove in this House and who passed away very suddenly on Monday. Mr. Speaker, when the BBC ends long-wave radio transmission next year, they will also end access to electricity tariffs like total heating with total control, relied on by almost 1 million households across the United Kingdom. Switching to smart meters is not going to fix this for most people, not least because the rollout programme is so far behind. So will the Prime Minister or possibly his Secretary of State for Energy get the energy companies, the regulator and the customer groups together so that we can stop passing the blame around and find a solution that does not yet again leave people in the Highlands and Islands behind and out in the cold?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I understand that an agreement has now been reached to ensure that radio teleswitching services will continue until June of next year, and Ofgem are also engaging with energy suppliers on their plans to support consumers through the transition. Whilst households that are currently covered by the service shouldn't be disadvantaged by the switch-off, it's energy suppliers who are best placed to advise on tariffs for those who have been switched to a smart meter. However, I will make sure that the Right Honourable Gentleman does get a meeting with the relevant minister to ensure that his constituents are not left behind during the transition.
Peter Aldis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The East of England is playing a lead role in delivering the UK's energy security, and without our contribution, the country will not be able to successfully transition to a renewable energy supply system. In recent months, our coast has taken a battering, and projects like the Lowestoft Flood Defence Scheme have been postponed. Will my right honourable friend ensure that government departments are fully coordinated so as to provide the region with good supporting infrastructure, proper protection for coastal communities, and every opportunity for local people to take up exciting new jobs?
Mr. Speaker, we are levelling up across the United Kingdom and investing in places that need it most, including, as my honourable friend rightly highlights, our coastal communities. Almost £1 billion of levelling up funding has been allocated to the east of England, including £75 million for coastal places. I know that he welcomes the town deal for Lowestoft in particular, but I will ensure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss how we can further support his region, its role in our energy security, but particular its coastal communities.
Deirdre Brown.
Mr. Speaker, the Greenpeace group Unearth found 36 supposed grassroots campaign groups which were actually administered by Conservative staff and activists and were forums for vile racism, anti-Semitism and Islamophobic attacks on Sadiq Khan. Now, one hears of other such coordinated efforts around anti-20-mile-per-hour zones in Wales. Can the Prime Minister shed some light on these shady groups spreading abuse, their funding, their links to his party, and whether he is aware of similar operations existing elsewhere in the UK? If he won't, will he at least commit today to investigate and take action to tackle the sources of this grubby gutter politics?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware about the topic that the honourable lady raises, but I'm not going to make any apology for Conservatives pointing out the record of whether it's the SNP in Scotland or the Labour government in Wales, because that's exactly what democratic process is about. She might not like it when we highlight their record, but we will keep doing so that we can deliver for people across the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome our government's commitments to boosting defence spending and supporting Ukraine, made possible by this Conservative Prime Minister's international leadership and sound management of the economy. My constituents have been doing us proud supporting Ukraine, like the Pot Place Garden Centre delivering ambulances, medical equipment and supplies, and Steve Hodgson providing vital aid. Would the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to my constituents and people up and down the land for their support for Ukraine and reaffirm that we will continue to stand with Ukraine for the sake of freedom, democracy and global security?
I join my honourable friend in thanking people up and down the country, including the fantastic work of his constituents in supporting the Ukrainian community in the face of Putin's illegal invasion. We remain steadfast in support of Ukraine, and in total, since the war began, we've pledged over £12 billion of aid to Ukraine. Last week, we announced an additional £500 million of funding, which will be used to deliver much-needed ammunition, air defence and engineering support and drones. But more importantly, and President Zelensky welcomed this, we are able to now say that we'll continue with this level of support for as long as it takes because of the historic increase in our defence spending. And it's crystal clear that on this side of the House, we can say that our support to Ukraine will never waver.
Margaret Bremer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1969, my constituent Georgina Jacobs gave birth to a baby boy who she named Robert. Sadly, Robert was born asleep, and in those days the hospitals would ask the father to collect the baby's body, take it to the cemetery and leave it there for burial. For 53 years, Georgina didn't know exactly where Robert was buried. When she eventually found him, she shared her story on social media, and other mothers who'd been through the same experience got in touch. Since then, Georgina has located over 60 babies on behalf of grieving parents and has deservedly been presented with the Wirral Award for her achievements. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Georgina on her award and on having brought comfort to so many parents and families? And will he, on behalf of all previous governments, apologise for this form of practice which left grieving parents with nowhere to visit their buried children?
Well, can I thank and commend the honourable lady for raising this case and just pay tribute to Georgina for what she is doing. I often say that one of the most incredible things about doing this job is meeting people like Georgina who have suffered tragedy in their lives, but then use that to campaign and inspire and bring about a better life for everyone else. She's a prime example of that. She deserves nothing but our praise and admiration, and I'm so pleased that she's brought comfort to so many other people too.
Palsy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since I was elected in 2010, Rugby's seen employment grow by nearly 6,000, with 10% more of my constituents in work, much of which has been driven by investment from advanced manufacturing in places such as Anstey Park, where we've got the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which the Prime Minister visited, High Temperature Research Centre, Rolls-Royce, Parker Meggitt, Fanuc and the London Electric Vehicle Company. Given that every Labour government has left office with unemployment higher than when they came in, can the Prime Minister see any reason why anybody would want to put this fantastic progress at risk?
I was pleased to see for myself on a recent visit that my honourable friend is a great champion for his constituents in Rugby, and I was very pleased to see the thriving local technology and manufacturing industry, which will help us deliver on our ambitions to make the UK a science and technology superpower. And he's right that we do have a record with 1 million fewer workless households, unemployment near record lows, and he's also right that we need to stick to that plan, because that's how we'll deliver the long-term change that our country needs and deliver a brighter future for families up and down the country, including in his constituency.
Colin Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hypocrisy needs called out, and everyone in this House will recall the former Irish Prime Minister in Brussels with a photograph of a bombed customs post, lamenting that any border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland was unworkable, it was in breach of the Belfast Agreement and could result in such troubles again. The hypocrisy of the Irish government from such a position has not been lost, with the Irish police now tasked to patrol the border, protect from the unsubstantiated, unfounded 80% figure of asylum seekers who supposedly make their way to the Republic of Ireland from the UK via Northern Ireland, when actually the reverse is true. Will the Prime Minister challenge and call out these actions and confirm what representations he has made to the Irish Prime Minister and the Justice Minister to respect the integrity of our UK and our border?
Well, the House will be aware that we have made commitments to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, and the Honourable Lady makes a very important point that the Irish Government must uphold its promises too. We can't have cherry-picking of important international agreements, and so the Secretary of State is seeking urgent clarification that there will be no disruption or police checkpoints at or near the border, and I can confirm that the United Kingdom has no legal obligation to accept returns of illegal migrants from Ireland. Now, it's no surprise that our robust approach to illegal migration is providing a deterrent, but the answer is not sending police to villages in Donegal. It's to work with us in partnership to strengthen our external borders all around the common travel area that we share.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, I was the Lord Commissioner that signed the Right Honourable Gentleman's special pension into law. He owes me one. But the Prime Minister is right. Labour's 75p was an insult to pensioners. Yet last year, our triple lock afforded pensioners the highest increase in 30 years. The Prime Minister is going to continue to deliver for dignity in retirement, isn't he?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right that we will provide dignity to all those in retirement. That's why we introduced the triple lock, and that's why this year the state pension is rising by £900. I'm also proud of our record to bring 200,000 pensioners out of poverty, and I can also say, as I've said previously, that the state pension will increase in each and every year of the next Parliament. And as he reminds us about the 75p increase, unlike Labour, pensioners in this country can trust the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, in only one of the 194 local authority areas in England are NHS ambulances meeting the national response time targets for responding to potential heart and stroke victims. Does the Prime Minister know which one it is?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to ambulance waiting times in A&E, of course there's more work to do, but the place where they are the worst in the country is in Labour-run Wales, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to our plan, we've seen an improvement in A&E and ambulance times. This winter over last winter, we have 800 more ambulances on the road, faster discharge out of our emergency care centres, and 10,000 virtual ward beds. Now, virtual ward beds. Of course, as I said, there is more to do, but the contrast to Labour on Wales is crystal clear. It's the worst A&E performance anywhere in Great Britain.
Stephen Trabb.
Mr. Speaker, for 6 months, thousands of my constituents have lived with foul, polluted air from the Withyhedge landfill site. The company is owned by somebody with previous convictions for environmental crimes and who, a few months ago, gave £200,000 to help Vaughan Gething become First Minister of Wales, after another of his other companies was loaned £400,000 from the Development Bank of Wales, overseen by the then Economy Minister, Vaughan Gething. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this serious matter demands an independent investigation? It's not some internal Labour Party matter, and ultimately that company needs to get out of my constituency and let people in Pembrokeshire have their quality of life back.
Well, my right honourable friend brings up an incredibly important issue, and I know that people in Wales are concerned about the relationship that he mentions, and I also agree with him on the need for transparency and an investigation regarding the Welsh Labour leader, because it's very clear that the situation is not at all transparent and answers are needed.
Mr. Speaker, it's been revealed by the Observer newspaper that the Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London is actually a member of the 6 Facebook groups which was mentioned by the member for Edinburgh North. And they are full of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism and the most disgraceful incitement to damaging property. And the worst bit, for those of us who were in the House when our members of Parliament were taken, death threats to the current Mayor of London, Mr Khan. Will he close down these Facebooks which have been begun by Conservative members of staff, and will he investigate the role of the current candidate and her membership of those disgraceful, racist Facebooks?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the election tomorrow will be fought on the substance of the issues that Londoners face, and the Labour record is crystal clear. House building in London has collapsed. Knife crime is rising. Mayoral taxes are up 70%, and drivers have been hit with ULEZ charges. And the Labour mayor just simply panders to unions and has decimated London's nighttime economy. That's his record. That's how he'll be judged. And people across London know that they will be safer with the Conservatives, with lower taxes and better services.
Final question, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, Mr. Speaker, is Staffordshire Day, where we celebrate all the brilliant things about the county of Staffordshire. So would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to our brilliant Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Ben Adams, and encourage the people of Staffordshire to vote for Ben tomorrow to make sure we keep Staffordshire one of the safest places to live, work and visit?
Well, I wish everyone a happy Staffordshire Day. And she mentions the PCC elections, and I think it's right that she does, because under this Conservative and previous governments, we've cut crime by over 50%, delivered 20,000 more police officers, but people with a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner are more likely to be victims of burglary, twice as likely to be victims of robbery, and as I said, last year knife crime in London went up by 20%. The facts simply speak for themselves. Vote Conservative for safer streets.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We'll let the front benches clear. To the first of the statements, I call Minister Tom Pesley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on immigration. This government is committed to reducing immigration into the United Kingdom, both legal and illegal immigration. Legal immigration has risen in recent years, in part because we've extended the hand of friendship to people fleeing conflict and persecution in Ukraine, Hong Kong and Afghanistan. That was the right thing to do. But another factor has been rising numbers of overseas students and workers and their dependents. They've risen to unsustainable levels. The steps my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, announced last year to cut net migration will mean that around 300,000 people who would have been eligible to come to the UK will now not be. We have restricted most students from bringing dependent family members, increased the salary most skilled worker migrants need to earn to get a visa by almost 50% to $38,700, stopped overseas care workers from bringing dependent family members with them, raised the minimum income for family visas to ensure that people are supported financially, and scrapped the 20% going rate salary discount for shortage occupations and replaced the shortage occupation list with a new immigration salary discount list. The latest estimates from the Office for National Statistics show that net migration in the year to June 2023 was 672,000. This is 73,000 lower than 6 months earlier. These are provisional figures and we need to go further, but these are encouraging signs. The latest statistics show numbers applying for skilled worker, health and care and study visas in the first 3 months of 2024 are down 24% on the same period last year. We removed the right to bring dependents on the student visa route for those starting courses from the 1st of January, other than on postgraduate research programmes and government-funded scholarships. Applications for student-dependent visas have fallen by 80% since our changes came into effect. From the 11th of March 2024, we've stopped overseas care workers from bringing family dependents and required social care firms in England to be Care Quality Commission registered in order to sponsor visas. In the year ending September 2023, an estimated 120,000 dependents came via this route. In the first 3 months of 2024, applications for health and care visas were down 28%. And this is just the start. Most of our changes have only just come into force. Meanwhile, we remain committed to stopping the boats. Following royal assent for the Safety of Rwanda Act and ratification of our treaty with Rwanda, we can now operationalise our plan to relocate illegal migrants to Rwanda. Rwanda is a safe country that has repeatedly shown its ability to offer asylum seekers a chance to build new and prosperous lives. It has a strong and successful track record in resettling people, hosting more than 135,000 refugees, and it stands ready to accept thousands more who want to rebuild their lives and who cannot stay in the UK. Once flights begin, we will have added another vital deterrence to crack down on the people smuggling gangs who treat human beings as cargo. The first illegal migrants set to be removed to Rwanda have now been detained following a series of nationwide operations this week. Operational teams within the Home Office have been working at pace to safely and swiftly detain individuals in scope for relocation to Rwanda, with more actively due to be carried out in the coming weeks. The action is a key part of the plan to deliver flights to Rwanda in the next few weeks. We've made solid progress in stopping the boats, but we need to finish the job. The number of small boat arrivals fell by more than a third in 2023. Our work with international partners prevented more than 26,000 crossings last year, as well as helping to dismantle 82 organised crime groups since July 2020. Our new agreement with Albania has cut Albanian small boat arrivals by more than 90%, and we recently signed a groundbreaking deal with Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, marking another crucial step in securing our borders. An initial cohort in the thousands of suitable cases for removal to Rwanda has been identified and placed on immigration bail with strict reporting conditions. We have a range of measures in place to ensure that we remain in contact with individuals, including both face-to-face and digital reporting. Immigration enforcement have a range of powers to trace and locate any individuals who abscond, as well as a dedicated team of tracing officers who work with the police, other government agencies and commercial companies to help trace individuals and bring them back into contact. It'd be inappropriate, of course, to comment further on operational activity. Mr. Speaker, immigration has enriched this country beyond measure, but it needs to be sustainable and it needs to be fair. Legal immigration should be focused on helping those in genuine need and on ensuring that our economy has the skills it needs in order to flourish. It is simply not right for those who can afford to pay gangsters to jump ahead of those who would play by the rules and whose need is greater. Nobody needs to flee to the UK from a safe country like France. Illegal immigration and unsustainable legal migration both place intolerable burdens on communities. Over time, they will undermine support for immigration in general, which would be a tragedy. That is why this government has a plan, which we're putting into action. There is further to go, but we're seeing the positive impact of it already. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for sight of this statement. But I have to say that this really is getting quite difficult to watch. Not for the first time, the Minister has come to that dispatch box desperately fishing for compliments when it is his government, his Home Secretary and his Prime Minister who are the cause of the catastrophic state of both the work-based migration and asylum systems. This is their chaos, their bin fire, and yet they expect praise each time they half-heartedly attempt to throw a single teacup of water towards the flames. Net migration has trebled since 2019 to a barely comprehensible 745,000. And under this government, the number of people crossing in small boats has spiralled from a few hundred in 2018 to tens of thousands every year. So it was toe-curlingly embarrassing to watch the Minister here claim that he's made, and I quote, solid progress on stopping the boats, when this year the number of crossers are at their highest level on record, more than 7,000 January to April. It was excruciatingly painful to watch the Home Secretary boast on social media about removing people with no right to be here, when the removal of failed asylum seekers has collapsed by 44% under this government since 2010. And the removal of foreign criminals has plummeted by 27%. And when he's completely lost track of 3,500 asylum seekers who he claims to be identified for deportation to Rwanda. It is also painful to hear the government figures bragging in the media that their Rwanda policy is somehow a success because a single person who didn't even cross the channel on a small boat has chosen to fly to Rwanda voluntarily with thousands of pounds of government money stuffed into his pocket by the Home Secretary. Mr. Speaker, this is not a policy. It's a headline-chasing gimmick, a fiasco and a farce. Labour has been absolutely clear that we reject the £500 million Rwanda scheme based on its unaffordability and its unworkability, and that will only cover 1% of small boat asylum seekers, and the government has no plan for the other 99%. We will repurpose that money to smashing the criminal smuggler gangs with our new cross-border police unit and a security partnership with Europol. And crucially, our new returns and enforcement unit will ensure that more flights take off to other countries which remove foreign criminals, failed asylum seekers and visa overstayers so that we can restore some control and integrity back into our asylum system in a way that is firm, fair and well managed. We'll also end the use of 250 asylum hotels and other inappropriate accommodation for asylum seekers, which is costing the British taxpayer millions of pounds every single day. Mr. Speaker, it is also, by the way, painful to hear the Minister bragging today about a reduction of health and social care visas awarded as a way of bringing down net migration. Firstly, based on such a small data sample. Secondly, because this is only one sector of the economy. And thirdly, because the Minister seems to care not one iota what this reduction in workers will mean for our elderly parents. What is the impact assessment? Where is it? And where is the plan to recruit local talent? Mr. Speaker, just a few questions to the Minister to end. On net migration, can the Minister explain why net migration has trebled since his party pledged to lower it during the 2019 general election? Will he admit that the huge surge in work-based migration over recent years is evidence of this government's total failure to deliver on domestic skills and training? Labour pushed the government into scrapping the unfair 20% wage discount on jobs on the shortage occupation list, which allowed companies to undercut British workers by hiring overseas. Can he explain why it took so long for his party to steal our policy? And on asylum, Home Office sources have told The Times that there are only 400 to 700 detention spaces reserved for migrants due for deportation to Rwanda. Can he confirm that this equates to less than 1% of the current asylum backlog in the UK? The Prime Minister promised to detain everyone who crossed the Channel on a small boat, over 30,000 last year. Given that we only have 2,200 detention spaces, what is going to happen to the remaining 28,000? The government's immigration and asylum policies have failed. We need to put the grown-ups back in charge so that we can fix this broken system and once again give our country an asylum and immigration system that it could be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, what a quite extraordinary response, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that this is a government that has a credible plan to bring net migration down by 300,000. And all of those measures are now in flight. And as I've been able to set out for the House, it is beginning to deliver the results that we said it would. And I will take absolutely no lectures from the shadow front bench about the issue of domestic employment. I was one of the ministers in the DWP that was proud to bring forward the Back to Work plan, the comprehensive reforms of the welfare system that we are taking forward as a government. And we are also seeing enormous cross-government join-up to support more domestic workers into those roles. That is the right thing to do, to support people in this country to take on these roles and fill those vacancies. And let's not forget the record of every single Labour government without fail, which leaves unemployment higher at its time of leaving office than it did at the start. What we've seen under this government is record low unemployment, benefiting communities across the country. And we've begun the process of delivering those measures in relation to legal migration, and we are also delivering when it comes to illegal migration. We have a plan. We are now getting on and closing hotels. 150 asylum hotels have been closed. That is a very positive thing. It is the right thing to do to make sure that we accommodate people in appropriate accommodation, but get away from the model of providing hotel accommodation for people. What is their plan on that? We have seen massive gains when it comes to asylum decision-making and productivity around those processes. What is their policy on that? We have seen crossings down by over a third last year compared to the year before. We have seen Albanian arrivals falling by 90%. Again, what is their offering to achieve likewise? There isn't one. And we will continue to sustain the progress that we have made. And we know from everything that has been said over the course of recent days that the Rwanda policy is beginning to have the desired effect, and the deterrent of that is clear. And when it comes to his meagre offering, I would just say this, that we've already doubled funding for the National Crime Agency for organised immigration crime work. We already have approximately 5,000 officials working on these matters within migration and borders. That is all that they're offering. It virtually resembles a blank sheet of paper, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that they offer no deterrent. They have nowhere to send people. They have no plan. They have no solutions. They try to bluff that they do, but they're kidding nobody. They're terrified that our plan is going to work. They're terrified that they'll have to scrap it. And they're terrified that they have no alternative. Only we have a plan, it's delivering results, and we will see it through.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, no hint of a plan of how you deal with failed asylum seekers from countries to which they cannot be returned without the Rwanda scheme. I'm pleased with the progress that the Minister has made on reducing net migration, but I am worried about the figures that came out yesterday, that of the 5,700 migrants who have been identified for removal, only 2,145 of them can be located. And this reflects the evidence from the second Permanent Secretary to the Home Affairs Select Committee earlier in the year, where some 17,000 failed asylum seekers who should be removed could not be located. Where are these people, and what is the Department doing about tracking them down and making sure they can be removed, as needs to happen as swiftly as possible?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend will appreciate that I can't go into the granularity of operational work that is ongoing in order to ensure that we can deliver on this policy. But what I can say is that an initial cohort of suitable cases of around 2,000 people have been identified for removal and have been placed on immigration bail with strict reporting conditions. For those outside that group, there is still a wide range of tools to maintain contact with them, and that includes, as I said earlier, the face-to-face and digital reporting, and many individuals also reside within Home Office accommodation. And we are confident, and my right honourable friend, the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration, leads on this work, but he is confident of the whereabouts once the decision to detain is made, and this is just one of the cohorts of people who may be eligible for removal to Rwanda. The policy is clear, and we are getting on and operationalise it, and that includes detaining people for the purposes of relocation.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thoulas.
Mr. Speaker, it's hard to know where to start with this complete and utter drivel. This minister comes here today proud of this tawdry, pathetic, self-defeating piece of fascist nonsense. The Tories, they don't like it, but, Mr Speaker, it is true. And I will explain to them why. Because the Home Office have put out Mr Speaker, they don't like the truth. The Home Office has issued a promo video this morning of people being detained, and it absolutely turns my stomach. A government that glorifies its state-sponsored people trafficking plans as it cuffs people and takes them out their beds to be sent to another country against their will. It is sickening, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, these plans are damaging to our society, to our economy, to the people who need care, to the people who want to love, live and study here. Universities are up in arms about their cuts to student numbers. It makes absolutely no sense. The draft rules that the government have issued on adults and risk in immigration detention were released this week. But instead of action on the very serious recommendations of the Brookhouse inquiry, the Home Office is instead doubling down on their policy of indefinite detention. And Labour are going along with all of this. Shame on them. Mr Speaker, far from what the Minister said, small boat arrivals are up this year. Rwanda is no deterrent because none of the other policies that they have had have proved as a deterrent. And the thousands of people who they want to send have disappeared, never to be seen again. And who can really blame them, Mr Speaker, if they're going to be plucked from their beds and taken away by ministers and sent to countries against their will? Indeed, who can blame them? And the risk also is that these people will end up being exploited because they have gone into hiding. They will be exploited, they will be trafficked, they will be vulnerable. Why is the Minister not acknowledging the impact that this policy will have on vulnerable people? And finally, Mr Speaker, if it is indeed the case that the person that they sent to Rwanda has not been granted refugee status in this country, why are they not being returned to their country of origin? Is it perhaps that that country is actually unsafe? And if that is true, why weren't they given refugee status here in the first place?
Well, what I would say, Mr Speaker, is that it's perfectly respectable as a position to want to protect our borders. It is right and proper to want to ensure that we have a fair and balanced system of legal migration that is sustainable. And I make absolutely no apology whatsoever, and nor will this government or any of the ministers in the Home Office, for placing front and centre the determination to protect people's lives. We have seen too many lives lost in the Channel at the hands of what are evil criminal gangs who take people's money, exploit them, send them in unseaworthy vessels out to sea with no regard whatsoever for human life. And candidly, beyond that, I'm not going to edify it with anything further.
David Green.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I very much welcome the fact that the Minister is able to come to this House with the first encouraging signs of lower migration numbers, which will be welcomed widely outside this House, including, I suspect, in Scotland. And does he agree with me that the lesson we should draw from this is that actually taking practical, detailed measures to crack down on the exploitation of certain types of visa routes is actually the way to make progress on bringing immigration numbers down, rather than the windy rhetoric we heard from the opposition spokesman?
Minister. My right honourable friend is obviously a very distinguished former Home Office Minister who had responsibilities in the immigration space. I would argue that a lot of the measures that we have announced and that are now all in flight really build on the earlier efforts of colleagues like him in these roles. He's absolutely right to say that these are balanced and measured policies that we are taking forward that do deliver on the legitimate aim of wanting to reduce inflows of legal migration into our country, to ensure fairness and to make sure that the model is sustainable, that people who come here are able to be properly supported. And I think that that is something that the British people strongly support, and I entirely share his sentiment.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The National Audit Office have estimated that it's going to cost £11,000 per person to fly them to Rwanda. Can the Minister just tell the House which airline he will be using to transport people to Rwanda, and what his estimate is of the number of people who will be sent to Rwanda in the first 3 months of the operation of the policy?
The chairman of the Select Committee, who I have enormous respect and admiration for, will understand why I'm not going to get into either operationally sensitive or commercially sensitive matters on the floor of this House. We know, and we've seen it consistently, that there have been great efforts to try and thwart this policy in a whole host of senses over the course of previous weeks, months and indeed years. We are not going to be thwarted in that way moving forward. We've made commitments, we're going to deliver on this policy, and we will get on and do that. There is a plan. As the Prime Minister has said, we will be sending a flight within the next 10 to 12 weeks. That is where our focus lies, and it would be entirely inappropriate to share those logistics on the floor of this House.
Sir Jacob Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As economically, mass migration has been shown to depress GDP per capita, and as it is clear that it is easier to control a much higher number of legal migrants, can I encourage the government to return to its promise of migration in the tens of thousands?
Minister.
Again, I'm not going to set out today what the government's future ambitions around this may be. What I am able to say is that we have a package of measures that is delivering a reduction in net migration of 300,000, spanning various different routes. I think that that is a very credible offering to meet the ambition of the British people to bring those numbers down, and not least for the reason that he touches on about the need for legal migration to this country needing to be sustainable. When you consider, for example, that for 100,000 care workers we saw 120,000 dependents come with them, I don't think by any objective yardstick that anybody who is fair-minded would think that that is a reasonable position. That's why we're bringing that to an end, and I'm pleased that the measures we've introduced are delivering results.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Times reports this morning that the number of visas for care workers granted in March this year is 83% down on the figure from March last year. So can the Minister tell the House, does he expect that reduction to continue? If he does, who will do the work that these carers would have done, and what impact does he think that might have on the National Health Service?
We have committed to monthly reporting around the net migration measures that we've introduced to allow Parliament and others to take a view as to the progress that we are making. There are very extensive efforts going on across government to employ more people from our domestic labour force. I rather wish that Liberal Democrat MPs were as enthusiastic as I am about the Back to Work plan and the work that we're doing around recruitment and retention. Those are credible efforts that we are taking forward to try and support more people in this country already into these roles. We're also working intensively to improve the processes around rematching individuals who are already here on the health and social care visas. These are the right steps to take. I'm not going to preempt what the figures may look like in the course of coming months. He'll be able to look at them in the same way everybody else will in future months.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's interesting to hear some of the Minister's comments today and see the impact of things that I think it's safe to say probably me and him would have wanted to do slightly earlier than ended up being done, such as the abolition of the 20% discount on the SOL. But would he agree the actual core problem at this is all too often people see immigration as the alternative to policies that affect the domestic labour market, rather than as immigration policy being part of supporting those policies. For example, sectors and businesses that were very keen to get a meeting with him in his new role, yet weren't quite so keen to get a meeting with him when he was Minister for Disabled People and trying to promote the Disability Confidence Scheme. What plans does the government have to make sure that future migration policy clearly links up with our wider policy for the UK labour market, and that it's not open to just lobby to try and avoid it?
Well, my honourable friend speaks with real authority on this issue and, of course, with real experience, and I well recall conversations that he and I have had in previous ministerial roles that both of us have held. I think he's absolutely right to allude to the fact that immigration ought not to be the first port of call when it comes to meeting our skills needs and when it comes to filling vacancies. That's entirely why this government has a coordinated plan when you take immigration into account, but also reflecting the Back to Work plan and the reforms that we are introducing in relation to health and disability benefits and a whole host of other areas. That should be our focus. I would argue there's a very strong moral case for doing that too. But it's the right thing to do, to invest in our domestic labour force, to get people into those vacancies. And where there does need to be a practical approach to immigration, we should look at that, but it most definitely shouldn't be the first port of call.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, David. I welcome the comments that have been made with regards to legal migration, which of course is very important for many sectors in business in Northern Ireland. However, turning to the very important and perplexing issue of illegal migration, can the Minister say something about what the Irish Republic's government said this week about pushing back returnees to Northern Ireland? Can he confirm that the Irish Justice Minister made up the fact of 80% of all of their problems were stemming from Northern Ireland? And can they say something about the Republic of Ireland's courts claiming that the United Kingdom was an unsafe destination to return people to in the first instance? Please assure me that Northern Ireland will not become the dumping ground for the right-wing problems that are being faced across the EU.
What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is that, as the Prime Minister has rightly said, and he made these points as well during the course of Prime Minister's questions, we are not going to accept returns from the EU via Ireland. When the EU doesn't accept returns back to France, where illegal migrants are coming from in the first place to the United Kingdom, the UK government's position is clear. We, of course, have regular and ongoing work when it comes to abuse of the common travel area. That is right and proper. And we also stand by our obligations under the Good Friday Agreement. But the position is as per that which the Prime Minister, I would argue, has made very clear.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Chelmsford is a very welcoming community. We've welcomed Ukrainian refugees, the families of those brave Afghans who stood beside our soldiers. We've welcomed Hong Kong Chinese. We have amazing domestic abuse services. We welcome women and their families from all over London and the South East who's fleeing violent men. We've built thousands of new homes, and because the London Labour Mayor has so spectacularly failed to build new homes, we welcome social housing tenants from all across London. But this cannot go on. We have 400 families unable to find homes in temporary accommodation. We have to control our migration. I am delighted that he is closing 100 hotels. Please, will he close the Atlantic Hotel and the Leg Street flats in Chelmsford, because Chelmsford has welcomed so many and we cannot home everyone.
I am very mindful of the fact that her community in Chelmsford have been incredibly generous as part of the work that we have been delivering as a UK government in conjunction with communities to provide sanctuary for those who are fleeing the most dreadful conflicts around the world. When you think about the response to Ukraine, when you think about the response to Afghanistan, when you think about the response to Syria, as well as the situation in Hong Kong. And she's also right to touch on the issue of abuse within routes. That is precisely why we are introducing greater CQC oversight and accreditation into the health and social care visa system. But she also, on the accommodation point, I hear her representations, we've had conversations about that. What is critical to allow us to get on and close hotels across the country and to get the accommodation picture into a more manageable state is to reduce the inflows. And what is clear is that only this government has a credible plan to reduce the inflows of people coming here illegally via small boats across the Channel. And we are going to see that through in order to make sure we can get on and close more hotels.
John MacDonald.
I believe as the policy is not being rolled out, it's seen to be the brutal, inhumane financial fiasco that it is. But yesterday, what happened was, as asylum seekers turned up for their normal reportage, their monthly reportage, they were detained, causing immense distress. What will inevitably happen is a number of those will then be sent to the detention centres in my constituency. We've had experience of what happens when people are distressed in this way. We've had suicides, self-harm and mental health breakdowns. Yeah. Could I have an assurance from the Minister that the charities that support asylum seekers when they're detained, for example Care for Calais and others, will have direct access to these detained individuals, and yes, that they will have access to legal advice?
Minister.
It is, of course, the case that there are established processes whereby people can access the support that is appropriate in the circumstances. I would argue I have a principled disagreement with him on this point around detention. I do think that it is perfectly right, and I recognise the SNP don't support detention either for the purposes of removal, but I do think that it is appropriate where people are here who have no right to be here, that for the purposes of removal they are detained, but that is done entirely properly in accordance with the law, with the proper safeguards around that, and as ever that will continue to be the case during the course of the work that is ongoing as part of the Rwanda relocations.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement and in particular the news that in some categories at least, immigration is now finally beginning to fall. On asylum specifically, the Irish Foreign Minister and former Taoiseach, Michel Martin, complained bitterly just a few days ago that large numbers of asylum seekers were moving from Northern Ireland into the Irish Republic. Sky News reported yesterday that the Irish government are now seriously contemplating moving police officers to the border to interdict that flow, which would effectively create a hard border on the island of Ireland, which some of us were lectured for years, including by the man who is today's opposition spokesman, that the Irish government would never contemplate under any circumstances whatsoever. So the stench of hypocrisy is strong. Will the Minister assure me we will never allow the Republic to return those people to Northern Ireland unless and until we can remove illegal cross-channel migrants to France? And as for the contemptible remarks of the SNP spokesman, at least the United Kingdom has a government, which is more than you can say for Scotland this week.
My right honourable friend knows that this government is resolutely opposed to a hard border on the island of Ireland, and I understand that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has requested an urgent meeting with the Irish government to seek assurances that there will be no adverse implications on the smooth operation of either the CTA or the Good Friday Agreement. That, I think, is an important meeting, and he's right to seek that. I again would reiterate the point that we would welcome a returns agreement with the European Union. We think that it is right that we explore those opportunities, and that is something that we will continue to pursue.
Joanna Cherry.
When I was first elected to this House, we often debated safe and legal routes, but we don't hear very much about that anymore. Many of my constituents are writing to me wanting a family reunion scheme for their relatives in Gaza. I recently co-authored a report with Helena Kennedy recommending that United Kingdom government have a humanitarian visa for women in Afghanistan and Iran. So can the Minister tell me, do the government have any plans to announce any safe and legal routes before the next general election?
The position is that, and I'm sure that the honourable and learned lady has followed this closely, that through the Illegal Migration Act, we made a commitment, and that was reflected in the legislation, to come forward and publish the cap and the statutory instrument that sits alongside that, which will support our efforts to be able to provide resettlement opportunities in this country for people in the years ahead. That work is on track. We will deliver on that commitment, and I'll be able to say more in due course.
Steve Bryan.
Care England appeared before my select committee and told us that the care sector was, quote, blindsided by the change to ban overseas care workers from bringing dependents to the UK. The government's own estimation of impact said the policy would not affect applicant numbers to come here. and help look after our constituents. Yet today's figures show care worker applications have decreased by more than half. Now, we all want to see a care sector, Madam Deputy Speaker, sustained by domestic labour. Why wouldn't we? But with 152,000 vacancies to the end of March this year, is this decrease the intention or the unintended consequence of these changes?
The position that I have consistently described is that the situation around dependence has been unsustainable. As I said in answer to an earlier question, we saw 120,000 dependents coming with 100,000 care workers. That is not a position that could realistically continue to be sustained. It is very early stages when it comes to the delivery of these measures. The health and social care changes have only just come into force. I think that he will want to satisfy himself, having looked at the figures across a number of months. But I also would just reiterate the point that there are huge opportunities around domestic recruitment. There is enormous work going on within government with a focus on retention. That is the right way to deal with these challenges. But there is still a health and social care visa route available for people. But in future, and I don't think it's unreasonable to think that individuals without dependents will come, they'll still be able to come, and that's entirely appropriate.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Minister gave a statement to the House, he said that the government had extended the hand of friendship to those fleeing persecution and oppression. Is he aware that a considerable number of those people that are in Calais or have crossed the Channel and tried to get to this country are themselves victims of human rights abuse, environmental disaster and wars, some of which this country has been involved in, such as Afghanistan? And his answer is to demonise them. His answer is to try and force them to go to Rwanda. Shouldn't he think for a moment of a sense of humanity about people who are in a desperate situation, through no fault of their own, looking for a place of safety in a country that was involved in the war in the first place in Afghanistan?
I'm exceptionally proud of the work that this country, and which has been supported by the Home Office and its teams, have done as part of the resettlement efforts, the enormous resettlement efforts that we have taken forward in recent years. In fact, only last week, I had the real privilege to spend some time with a team who had been supporting some new Afghan arrivals through the ACRS. I was incredibly moved by that work. Those individuals have come through a safe and legal route, and we will continue to see through those commitments. The UK has played its part, it will continue to play its part. But what is not right, in any sense, is to give the impression that anybody ought to be getting in a small boat, paying an evil criminal gang to do so, coming across the Channel, risking their lives, and we saw a young girl lose her life only last week. Nobody needs to leave those French shores in order to find safety. We do have safe and legal routes, and it's right that people come through those.
Sir Edward Lee.
15 months after the government announced that they were taking over the whole of RAF Scampton and putting 2,000 migrants there, not a single one has arrived. We fought the Home Office to a complete standstill. Everything we've said has been proved correct. Costs are rising exponentially from 5 million to 27 billion. The buildings are decaying, the runways decaying. The Labour Party have now joined my early day motion against this. We've involved the Levelling Up Secretary, who's now imposing all sorts of conditions on the Home Office. Will this excellent minister, and he's a really first-class minister, now ensure that his attention is focused, laser-like, in working with us, in doing what we've argued for from the beginning, releasing the entire site to Scampton Holdings so we can get the biggest and best levelling up we've ever had on a former RAF base?
Minister.
My right honourable friend is a tireless campaigner for his constituents. He knows that I am exceptionally sympathetic when it comes to trying to deliver this regeneration project for Lincolnshire. I appreciate entirely the enormous economic benefit and opportunity that that presents for people in the Scampton area from a amenity but also from a jobs perspective. And we are working intensively with him and with the local authority to move this forward. We do, of course, need to realise our accommodation ambitions for that site in the short term, but I also want to find a way forward and agree a way forward that means that those regeneration ambitions can also be realised as quickly as possible.
Clive Redford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We now know that it's the government's intention to pay board and lodging for 5 years for anyone voluntarily removed to Rwanda. That's a commitment that's going to fall heavily on the next government if they're even successful in getting anyone to Rwanda. So how much is this nonsense going to cost?
Minister.
It's fair to say that if we were to adopt the approach of his front bench, and no doubt one that he subscribes to, we would continue to have uncontrolled immigration to our country via the Channel. He offers no alternative solution to the one that we are taking forward as a government. That is an unsustainable position. I am confident that the Rwanda policy will help to bring to an end these channel crossings, to put those evil criminal gangs out of business and get this issue under control. That has to be right. What is clearly unacceptable is to parade around with no credible policy alternative and just pretend that everything's going to be okay.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's very encouraging news to hear about the progress on tackling both legal and illegal migration, particularly on the operationalisation of the Rwanda policy. And I've pushed on a number of occasions for further schemes with other third countries because I think we need to see that deterrence. And I've been previously told that we were waiting for the delivery of the Rwanda scheme. So now that we have delivered the Rwanda scheme through Parliament, could the Minister look again at further schemes with other third countries as well, so we can offer the maximum possible deterrence to those trying to come in here illegally?
My honourable friend, of course, is right on the point about deterrence. He has been very supportive of the work that we have done that has seen Albanian arrivals fall by 90%. Again, that recognises and brings forward the value that deterrence has. I also know that the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration has also been having conversations with the Vietnamese about the small boat arrivals that we've seen from Vietnam. We will continue to work hard to deliver more international cooperation in this space. And I also think it's right that the Home Secretary is spending considerable amounts of his time and energy on informing the conversation internationally about what more we can do to tackle these migratory flows. And we know that where we led the way when it came to announcing Rwanda, others internationally are seeking to follow.
Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, my 21-year-old Springburn constituent, Abdullah Salimi, was detained and he was then taken from Scotland to England, a 10-hour journey. I suspect because in Scotland you get legal aid, so he'll have legal representation. Now he has none. He was taken on a 10-hour journey, given no water, no food. Is that right? Is that acceptable? What's the reason for that? He had his phone taken off him, so he couldn't contact anybody, couldn't tell anybody. Is that right? Is that acceptable? What is the reason for that? And also, no, I'm not finished. I went to the Home Office this morning. I emailed the Home Office last night. They refused to give me any information. I went with this letter for one of his colleagues and they refused to take the letter. I am his MP. I have got the right to know what is going on in his life and the right to try to represent him. Why am I being denied that, and why is he being denied the rights that you enjoyed at the age of 21?
I would make the point that I am a British citizen who is in this country legally, and the fact is, it is right. Now, if the Honourable Lady allows me to just finish the point, it is entirely right and proper that people are detained on a legal basis for the purposes of removal under this policy. But there are always safeguards around that. I will very gladly accept the letter from the Honourable Lady and ensure that it reaches the right destination within the Home Office, and we will, of course, in the normal way, look very carefully at any concerns that she wishes to raise. I recognise that she is entirely opposed to the policy objective that we are seeking to advance. There is a principled disagreement there. She thinks I'm wrong. I think that she is wrong about this. But on those specific points, if she'd like to share them with me, I will gladly ensure that she receives a full response.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you. The signs of a fall in net migration will be welcome across Amber Valley. Could I raise the concern
or a situation where a young UK national goes and works abroad for a while and then forms a relationship, but now isn't yet earning enough to sponsor their spouse to come and live in the UK? Is there more we can do to help in that situation? Perhaps by at least clarifying the guidance that they can use actually both of their salaries so they can meet the earnings threshold.
There has been no change to the way in which the various requirements can be met when it comes to the family visa changes in relation to savings and the like. And there is also, and we had a good debate on this last week in Westminster Hall, there is also that important safeguard around Article 8 rights, and as part of the consideration of any application, all of those factors are given proper and due consideration to make sure that we get the right decisions on individual cases. We do think that it is right to introduce those salary changes. They are being increased incrementally and are not being applied retrospectively, but there is, as I say, that important safeguard around Article 8 rights.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker. First of all, we have supported this policy, albeit with some reservations, because we believe it is important to break the criminal gang model and also to ensure the stability of the United Kingdom. But I must say I'm not very convinced today by the Minister's arguments that we're sending one person with £3,000 in their pocket to Rwanda and we're still looking for half the people who are meant to be sending. But this week the Irish Government, in an attempt to divert attention from its own domestic failures in housing and immigration, has started a row about immigrants coming from the United Kingdom into the Irish Republic. This usual Brit bashing exercise that they engage in anyhow. But can he, and he's been asked twice today and he hasn't given an answer, can he tell us what specific measures he will put in place to ensure that a cynical Irish government does not simply bus immigrants to the border and dump them in Northern Ireland?
The situation that he describes would not be appropriate, and it is of course a matter for the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration. He leads on that work within the Home Office. What I can say to him again is that we have been clear that if there is a desire for a returns deal, that needs to be done with the EU in the way that I think the British people would rightly expect. And when it comes to the earlier point that he made in relation to Rwanda, this voluntary return that we saw is part of a very established approach to voluntary returns that was in place even when the last Labour government was in office. But we are now getting on and delivering the wider scheme. The Prime Minister has been clear that we will operationalise that over the course of the next 10 to 12 weeks. We are determined to send individuals with no right to be here to Rwanda to put out of business the evil criminal gangs responsible for the misery in the Channel.
John Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister,